Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Parallel Systems broadcast. We are joined again by Lynette Zang. Lynette, it's been about a year since she was last on the show. A lot has changed since then. There's been so much to discuss. So let's get straight into it. You recently left ITM, Lynette. So let's start there. I just wanted to let listeners know where they can find you now.
Well, we now have Zang Enterprises, and so the website is LynetteZang.com, and then we also are on YouTube and Twitter. A lot of the work is done on YouTube and Twitter at the Lynette Zang, and Instagram and Facebook is at Lynette Zang. So, and our phone number, which I love, is 833 GLDZANG.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, congratulations on going it alone, Lynette. It's nice to have that freedom as we discussed before we started the show. And Lynette, so far in 2024, we've seen a lot happen. Inflation has continued to come down. The S&P has continued to grind higher, but we keep hearing about trouble in China. We've heard that Europe now looks like it's going into recession. So what's your general take on the strength of the global economy right now?
I think the global economy is actually on the brink of a major crisis, regardless of how they want you to think about it. And even when you're talking about inflation slowing down, look at your food prices. Look at the things that we use on a day-to-day basis, and even the numbers that just came out in the U.S. Oil was down 3.6%. And so they're saying, oh, look at that. Except that they remove food and oil, the two key pieces, from their key inflation gauge. I think that it's a joke. I think that it's all about perception management, and I don't think that the global economy is doing well. And for many reasons, I don't think inflation is under control. And when they lower the interest rates to give the stock markets a boost again, and the bond markets a boost again, what does that do to the inflation that's still simmering there? Pushes it up.
And they can cook the books so much on this one, Lynette, but do you think people are starting to feel that disconnect between what they're being told by the government, by the Federal Reserve, and what they're actually seeing when they go to the supermarket or they fill up their car or they get their energy bills in? And how are they going to cope if that inflation comes back at, say, 10, 15% again?
Well, you know what we're also seeing on a global basis, and which gives me a lot of positivity, frankly, is a move toward gold and silver by more of the general public. In the US, this is witnessed by Costco and Amazon and Walmart selling gold and silver bars and selling out as soon as they have them listed on their sites. But we're also seeing that same kind of behavior in South Korea, in China, and in other places around the world. So yes, you're right, Mike. There's an absolute disconnect between what they're saying. Like Janet Yellen says, I don't understand why people don't understand how good the economy is doing. Well, you go to the grocery store once or twice, or some people go, more than that a week. It's in your face. The prices are in your face. Same thing with the gas pumps. So, yeah, they're losing a lot of credibility, which is why I think more and more of the public is going to gold, which is what we need, because we can create a very quiet and peaceful global revolution just by people converting their fiat money, their government based money, into sound money, gold and silver.
And do you think, Lynette, that there's a difference between the buyers in the East and the buyers in the West? Because it seems like in China, they'll buy at any price, whereas in the West, it was always considered something that they'd buy when maybe they saw the prices going up. But do you think that's changing because we've got all-time highs, and yet we're still seeing quite a lot of buying? Like you said, Costco, I can't remember the number. I think it was around $200 million a month in profit from gold bars. So that's quite high for the West.
That's very high. And I do, look, this is a con game. And even though people don't like to review it or talk about it as a con game, the bottom line is inflation was baked into the very system that we work for. So therefore, we're getting paid less and less and less for our work. And I think that people are starting to recognize that with the rapid inflation, if they can keep it at that 2% level, then they don't make changes. I mean, the public doesn't really make changes in their spending patterns. They take on more debt to sustain a standard of living. But I think, as witnessed by more and more of the public buying the gold and silver, and the global central bankers buying more silver, more gold than they ever have historically. And in China, particularly, they allowed their citizens to buy gold again in 2006, but that was primarily done in the banking system, with the gold held in the banking system. Now we're seeing the Chinese public that are watching their wealth evaporate because they held so much of it in real estate and so much of it in the stock market. And they're very speculative. They have a tendency to be a lot more speculative there than, although we're pretty speculative here as well. But they're watching their wealth erode because of the problems that China's having in those two markets, the real estate and the stock market. And so they're flying to the safety of physical gold in their possession, because gold and silver in any form are monetary at its base, which is why I always have my thing of junk silver right here. That's sterling, 92.5% pure.
And when it comes to the US right now, Lynette, how secure do you think the banking sector is? We got the
Oh,
FDIC quarterly report recently, and it said there's $517 billion of unrealized losses, which I think is probably a huge underestimation. So, do you think that we're going to see some more banking crisis in the coming year, and that maybe this is tied to the gold buying too?
Uh, absolutely. And remember, that higher for longer mantra with interest, if this is interest rates and this is market value of the bonds, right? Or any of the debt instruments, that would be mortgages, auto loans, any debt instruments. As interest rates go up, the market value of these bonds and these other debt instruments go down. And so that impacts everybody. They wanted you to think that it was just relegated to the regional banks with that crisis. But the reality is that all of the banking system is incestuously intertwined. And now in that report, they admitted that it's infiltrated, the problem has infiltrated and is much bigger in the large banks that have been deemed SIFIs, two systemically important financial institutions that are too big to fail. This banking crisis is not over, because the valuation of all of these banks are based upon, well, look, nothing in this. Originally, the stock market reflected what was happening in the economy, but it doesn't do that anymore. It's all a big, huge trading mechanism. And with the banks, more than 50% of their profits are generated through trading. And when you talk about the level of assets that are held inside of the banks, what they're not talking about are all of those derivative bets, which are big leverage bets that are on top of all of these banks and all of those interest rates and all of those debt instruments. And all of this is being hidden from us. It's a very, very opaque market that we cannot see. And those have been exploding since the Fed started raising rates so aggressively, and the global central bankers have been raising rates so aggressively. And that's what's going to force them to pivot. But it's not like that's going to fix the issue, because they also say they're tightening, which means running off their balance sheet and raising rates, have been sufficient. And yet, if you look at their data on the financial ease in the economy, it's as easy as it's ever been, which is why you also hear constantly, wow, this is kind of a surprise. We've never seen this before. How shocking. Why aren't these doing what they normally do? Because we're at the end of this currency's life cycle. And you can't just turn that around, because officially there is virtually no purchasing power left. The only thing that is yet to be recognized, and that's what all of the public buying of gold and silver is showing me, is the public confidence in the currency, in the powers that be. It's dwindling rapidly. Although they did just come out with a report that said that the public's perception of the stock market is as positive and high as it's been in 3 years. All the better to transfer risk, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. Well, I was looking at a document recently, and apparently they're now going to be putting all of the treasuries through the DTCC as well. And that's going to create a whole new collateral base. So it seems like they're trying to gobble up as much collateral ready for the eventual collapse. And with David Rogers' web book, The Great Taking, we know that if we're involved in the financialized assets at that point, we're going to get wiped out. So it's never been more important to have assets outside the system. So I wanted to get your take on that, Lynette. Do you think that that is a serious risk for us all right now, that that is going to happen? We are going to see this monetary reset in, say, the next decade or sooner?
Oh, there isn't even one doubt in my mind that that's the case, because the system actually died in 2008. And what did they do to resolve it? They just did a whole bunch of this, and they took away your purchasing power and created the rapid inflation that we've all been experiencing. Yeah, we're at the end. Officially, you have 3 cents worth of purchasing power left out of the original dollar's worth of purchasing power. What do you do when you get to zero? What does that look like? Nobody can answer that question because they want to just ignore it and go, la, 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 la. I mean, once you officially get to zero, the only thing left is principal. And that's what the experiment with the negative rates was about, which, by the way, was a big fat fail. That's why we have to reset into a completely new system. And the one they have in mind with us is one that's full surveillance and full control. And that's what makes having this outside of the system and your importance of holding sound money. I mean, if you don't hold sound money, and if everything you hold is in intangible assets inside of the system that they are manipulating and controlling, are you going to have any other choice if they tell you to jump? You're going to have to say how high. But I know without a doubt that it is critically important to be as self-sufficient and independent as you can possibly be, because that's the only way that you can say no. And how do you do that? It's my mantra that I've been executing in earnest since I bought this property in 2010 to build my last stand. Food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, which has become arguably the most important part, and shelter, because these are all the things that we need to have a reasonable standard of living. And the reason why I say that community has arguably become the most important is because I had the luxury of time to build an urban farm. I mean, before 2008, I was living in a little 2-bedroom condo and getting ready to retire, where I could just lock the door and off I go. And I had all these plans of traveling and staying in different places and blah, blah, blah. 2008 happened. I didn't think we'd see it in my lifetime. I was wrong. And I knew when that happened that it was all different. We were now at the very end of the Currencies life cycle. And so I bought this property, which is just a half an acre in dead central Phoenix, because this is where my children live and I'm not going to leave them. Subsequently to 2020, I did buy a bug out location, because while I could generate 100% of my food. I probably generate about 85% of my food right now. But I could easily go to 100 if I needed to, just like I did in 2020, right? And I'm walking around my property going, oh, aren't I smart? And, I had enough to share. Jacqueline called me up, freaked out because she couldn't find toilet paper. Maybe people remember that. The store shelves went bare, right? But I'm thinking how smart I am, because that was not an issue for me because I was prepared. And yet there were riots at the Capitol, which is near my house, and riots at Fashion Square, which is in a fancy neighborhood by my children's homes. And I thought, there's the hole in my strategy. And I went, and it took me a while to find the right one. but I found a bug out location that is completely 100% off grid. And I've been building the infrastructure there for food to feed, frankly, 40 people, to create a community up there where I can feed 40 people.
Yeah, I think that's really good for, excuse me, a really good thing for listeners to hear, Lynette, in that you do walk the walk. You know, when you say these
Oh, yeah.
things, you are actually getting yourself ready. And I think that's one of the things my listeners always say about your channel. They love your channel because, like me, I live on a farm too. You live on a farm, you're producing food. And I think really that's the way forward because without taking some self sufficiency, I don't think gold's going to help you in an acute crisis because it'd actually make you a target if you was going to your neighbors and saying, "Hey, I've got some gold here. Can I buy?" Well, what are you going to buy with the gold coin at that point? The price is going to be insane in nominal value. So you actually need to have some of these things in place now, right? You have to start getting ready for these harder times.
Well, I 100% agree with that. But does everybody have the luxury of that time? And does everybody have the means to buy gold and silver? And I don't think you're going to go advertising it. You know, you probably go to your day-to-day stuff with the silver. And, you know, my good friend George Gammon, whom I absolutely adore and love, recently went down to, I think he was in Medellin, but he was in South America, with a country that was in hyperinflation, and he brought down gold and silver and Bitcoin. And nobody wanted the Bitcoin. He did better with gold to a deep nominal discount, and he did the best with silver. But where he really did well was when he was among his community that knew him and trusted him. And to your point, you know, do we have time to build these farms now? No, because we're at the end. But like I've built a farm, and you've built a farm, and could you use help on your farm?
Yeah, always.
Right? Exactly. Always. So that's why I think it's important to come together in communities so that you can secure your access to food and water that you cannot live without. You've got to eat, you've got to be able to drink. But also there is security and there is safety in numbers. You can bring any skill set that you have. I think this is a great time to learn new skills. I mean, because of my farm, I can lay irrigation. Do I want to lay irrigation? Not really. But could I do it if I needed to? Sure. Could you use some help laying irrigation at times?
Yeah, I could use a lot of help. We've got about 50 birds that were nesting right at the minute. So little chicks of all different types of flocks of birds. They're running riot. We're trying to dig up our vegetables and get things planted. It's a 24/7 job when you're trying to provide enough food just for two people, let alone, 10 people, 20 people. And I don't think you realize that before you get into it. So as soon as I finish this video, I'm back out in the gardens.
Exactly. I mean, I'm very lucky in that I have my community members here that really take care of that. And I don't have to do that because I wouldn't have time to do this. But that's my point with a local community, because I'm pretty sure that if they helped you, that then you would let them harvest and take stuff home and, you know, secure that peace. And then globally, community is critically important to create that quiet revolution where you're just taking this garbage, and converting it into sound money. And if enough people do that, well, guess what? Then we got a shot at having a seat at the table in this new financial system. Because if we don't get that, and they do end up forcing us into full surveillance, yeah, I mean, we're going back to feudal times where we just have a couple of people that own everything and others that have to rent. And guess who gets to choose the prices? And then you're back in slavery. We're back in feudal times. I'd rather have the wealth shift our way. And honestly, that's where gold comes in. Silver for me is about day-to-day barterability. Gold for me is about wealth preservation because its most important function is to hold its purchasing power intact over time. That's what it does, fully tested for thousands of years. And so what happens is you have gold going by the spot. Now look, when it's a physical only market like this one, that's where you find the truth. But in the spot, the paper market, they can create as much gold and silver that does not nor ever will exist as they want to, and it's super cheap to do it. And they're encouraged to do it because it supports the central bankers' gold or goals. However, when you're holding this and this is fully suppressed, when all confidence is lost, then they take this stuff and they revalue, and this has no intrinsic value, and they revalue it against this. So all of those assets that have been targeted for reflation, their words, not mine. So real estate, stocks, even bonds, etc. Okay, right now they're all up at nosebleed levels. That flip-flops, right? And then if you're holding gold, you're holding your purchasing power. You have the opportunity to reposition into those other income producing assets. We have the luxury to see who will survive, right? I don't know who's going to survive because this is very, very opaque, right? But you will once it's like the tide. Once that tide goes out, that's where you see all the garbage. And we're seeing that now with the debt wall and all of the zombie corporations that haven't been able to pay all of their interest in at least 3 years, let alone any of their principal. And where the banks were supporting them so it didn't show those losses on their books. You did see the report from the most recent report from the FDIC on the quarterly banking stats, 9 quarters in a row of huge losses in their portfolios that they choose, or they say that they're holding to maturity so they don't have to claim the valuations, but even for the assets they have for sale if there is a run on the bank. So that's what they're trying to prevent, is that run on the bank, because that's when it becomes obvious.
And do you think what we're seeing internationally now, Lynette, with BRICS creating the new monetary system, I think the summit's in Russia this year, so that's going to be a very key one. And they're going to be talking
Yeah.
about de-dollarization and a separate payments mechanism outside the dollar. Do you essentially see that what we're going to have is, when this all comes down, it's going to be a complete reordering, not just of great nations and big nations, and the US is going to collapse, Europe's going to collapse, but then
Oh,
also
it's
we're going to see a
global.
reordering of everyday people. It's going to be a case of, doesn't matter what paper wealth you had, it's going to be about what physical wealth you've now got.
That is exactly right. Because, like, I have here a $10 trillion Zimbabwe note. Do you know what you can buy with this?
Not a lot.
Absolutely nothing. And they just came out with the ZIG, which is supposedly a basket of currencies with a component of gold. So this is the next experiment, but the problem is it's non-convertible. You see, in the beginning, when we had and I have some here, but when we have like the gold and silver certificates, here, this is a $10 gold certificate, okay? You could walk into the bank with this and walk out with this. If you walked out with this, that means that there was less gold in the system. It gave the public the power, because then it restricted, it required fiscal responsibility and restricted how much debt those governments could grow, our government could grow. Whereas if you can't convert it, then how do you know the gold is really there? How are you holding the government's toes to the fire? You can't. So I'm watching Zimbabwe very, very closely. This experiment isn't really working yet because the public has lost all confidence in the currencies, in their and in those that are guiding it, and they don't really trust the gold-backed currency. But what, about a year and a half-ish or so ago, Zimbabwe issued a gold coin so that the public could hold their purchasing power back better. Well, who in the public could afford that? Not the middle class, certainly not the poor, right? So the wealthy hold their purchasing power so they can take advantage of this crisis, because there's always opportunity in crisis. And yeah, I think that that crisis is going to be global. I don't think anybody would be spared. I think everybody in the world, it's interesting because I could get a purchasing power chart of the US dollar, but it's hard to find it in different countries. But you know darn well that inflation reduces purchasing power and it compounds. So we are simply at the end. They cannot postpone this for decades unless they come up with, I mean, I don't know what else they're going to come up with, but I don't even think they want to be honest. Because to your point, the BRICS are creating a parallel system, right? What happens when that global financial infrastructure is completed? How easy would it be to turn that one on and turn the US SWIFT system off? Pretty easy. I don't think we're keeping pace with the rest of the world in this regard. And maybe that's all by design.
Well, this leads to another question then, Lynette, because if that's what's happening and the US know that's happening, if we know it, then they know it and they can see it. Is that why we're seeing this manifesting global conflict and a potential World War III? Is the US trying to stop this transition or to hold it back? And are they going to fight to the bitter end? Because if so, that means we're going to have a lot more conflict and we might have to get prepared for that as well.
Well, 100% that this conflict is about creating distraction. And it's one of the repeatable patterns that has happened every single time. I mean, there's over 4,800 currencies that don't exist. I mean, I have some of them here, right? But there are over 4,800 fiat money currencies that do not exist anymore because they have been hyperinflated away, and war is always part of it. And some people that are much smarter than me in cyberspace have said that World War III has already begun, but you can't see it in cyberspace, and they need the public to see it to create that distraction. And so in order to do that, you got to have boots on the ground. So that's why we're fighting the boots on the ground war. And I am not, look, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, there are 196 countries in the world, and 189 of them are members of the IMF. And that is the Treasury Secretary and the central bank chiefs, all technocrats, unelected officials. Do you think they sit down and talk all the time that they're meeting? So who's to really say, and I don't know this is just my supposition, this is just my opinion, that this is not a coordinated collapse, that what they're trying to do is a controlled implosion of the entire global financial system so that they remain in power on the other side of this mess. And all your wealth transfers their way. What choices do you have? I'm saying, let's take advantage of it. Let's have the wealth transfer our way instead of away from us. And you can do it by holding your purchasing power and allowing that flip-flop. Undervaluation, here's overvalued assets, that flip-flops. And then you can take some of your fiat money gains from here and convert it into those undervalued income producing assets. And guess what? Come out way, way better than you are going into it.
Okay, does this make sense to you, Lynette? Do you actually think there is a genuine conflict between the East and the West, that this is two systems, rival systems, or do you think it's all just part of one big theater or stage show to help bring about this collapse?
I think it's more of a stage show, but I cannot prove that. So I cannot say that definitively. But I have, I've studied currencies and currency life cycle since 1987. And I kind of think that when it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it lays eggs like a duck, it's probably a duck.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess irrespective of any of that, if in the next system gold is put back into the new system, and it's going to be, you can see them setting up for it one way or another, everything has to reset against it and all of those paper assets have to be inflated away or just defaulted upon, then what does that actually do to gold? What does it do to the price of gold? What does it do to gold in terms of its standing amongst people's financial portfolios? I guess it's, I mean, what can you even put a number on it? Does everything just get revalued 10 times higher, 20 times higher?
Well, it kind of depends. I can put a numerical value on it because this is money in this current system, money's created from debt. There is an unlimited amount of this. They can create as much of this. I mean, it's even easier than me pushing the button on my money gun, right? But there is a finite amount of this, and we've already hit peak gold, which means that there's less gold in the ground than there has been put out. But there is a finite amount, and this is used in every single sector of the global economy, every single one. So it has the broadest base of functionality and the broadest base of use, and there's always a market. This is only used in one place. So here's the thing. When this happens 100% of the time. So even though I can't guarantee tomorrow, this is the most likely outcome. That they will have to put a component of gold into the new system, and they've talked about that to regain the confidence of the masses. Because when we go into a global hyperinflationary depression, which is what I see coming, because to your point, they have to burn off all of those excesses. Then, how much is an ounce of gold worth? What's it worth right now? You're going to look on the spot market and say, oh, well, the spot market's telling me. No. The spot market does not reflect true valuations or truly what's happening in the economy, either locally or globally. But to get the true fundamental value, you simply take all the debt that's been created and use that as a proxy to all the money that's been created, and you divide it by all the gold that exists in the entire world, because we can account for 98% of all the gold. Gold is indestructible, and that gives you over $40,000 an ounce. That's what it's worth today. The more debt they grow, the more this kind of stuff that they do, the higher that number goes, and you will see that when it is time to try to regain your confidence. So hyperinflation is going, everybody's screaming, everybody's suffering, and then they do those overnight revaluations where they take this that has absolutely no intrinsic value used in one place, minimum demand, and they revalue it against gold. And that's when you will see gold move toward its fundamental value. It's hard for me to say that overnight they would do it at 40,000, because what I don't know is what that initial coverage ratio is going to be. I can tell you that the devaluation of the currency on average is about 1,000 to 1. So if you go to bed at night and you've got 10,000 bucks in the bank, when you wake up in the morning, you got one. But I don't know what that coverage ratio is going to be, and nobody's going to know what that is. And the other thing that we don't know is how many overnight revaluations they're going to be doing. So globally, on average, it's 3 times, but Venezuela's already done it 6 times. And I think, or 5 times. And I think Zimbabwe, this is their 6th time. So maybe they're going to do it once, maybe they're going to do it 20 times. I don't know. We won't know until then. But we certainly do know its true value. And we know that it holds your purchasing power, because that's been tested way over 4,800 times. And even the Bank for International Settlements, what do they say about gold's position in foreign exchange? They say that only gold, they're not 2 or 3 or 5 choices, only gold is the only financial instrument that has no counterparty risk. That's it. Everything else is credit. All that debt, that's all counterparty risk.
And Lynette, one final question before we leave this subject. We've discussed gold a lot, and people often ask me about diversification. They say, I don't want any more financial assets. I've got gold, I've got silver. And I remember before you left ITM, there was this fantastic tour of your house where you showed people this lifetime collection of antiques and these things of value that you've put into your life. So is that another way that people could maybe play this to start actually finding what true value is again in terms of the things they put in their house, like antiques, furniture, jewelry, artwork, that there are other ways to diversify as well to have things that actually will increase in value hopefully in the future rather than just decrease like junk furniture and IKEA.
Right. Well, that's a really good point, Mike. And what you're really talking about is dynastic wealth. And that's wealth that lives in families at least 300 years. Think about, well, he's now the king of England, but his mom, before she passed, what do they have? They have truly rare collectibles. They have real estate and they have gold. So these are the things that have all proved through the test of time. And while they may change ownership, they still have value. And it's not a rare collectible because I say it or Franklin Mint says it. It has to be a truly rare piece that has withstood the test of time. And the answer is yes, but you kind of have to know what you're doing. And I've been doing this thanks to my Uncle Al. I am ever so grateful to him because I've been doing this on some level my entire life. And it started with the tangible assets. And what we know is that if they're high quality, he always said you buy first with this. But if they're high quality, it's so simple. This is how the trend works. Undervaluation to fair valuation to overvaluation to fair valuation to undervaluation. And it's constantly moving around like that depending upon where we are. With some of those assets, like fine art and antiques and things like that, they're really kind of overvalued because a lot of the wealthy are moving into that area. Whereas gold as a monetary metal is suppressed because a rising gold price is an indication of a failing currency. The governments, the central bankers do not want you to understand that the currency is failing. So they artificially suppress it. But again, you flip-flop, and that is certainly a way to diversify. But I will tell you, without any doubt, and I've been doing this on some level, seriously, my entire life. I've been groomed for this moment in time. The lion's share of my wealth is right here, right here. The silver I have for barterability, and there are reasons, silver gets used up. It's the secondary monetary metal. It too is used throughout the global economy. And this is more of a diminishing asset. And I know that a lot of people look at that gold silver ratio and think, they're both severely undervalued. But I've also done studies on what happens to gold and silver during hyperinflationary events, during depressionary events, and those kinds of things. And we'll see that ratio narrow to a certain point. And then once the reset occurs, because that's what they reset against is gold, then that ratio grows wider again. But I love it for my purchasing power on my day-to-day. I need a tank of gas. I need this. So in the strategy that we put together, based on those repeatable patterns, you can determine how much silver do I really need to meet my day-to-day barterability needs. I do it for 10 years because this is not going to be a quick or easy turnaround. And then how much barterable gold and how much investment gold do I need? What do I need to meet my goals within my budget? What are they? So we always define goals first. That's critically important. And then you're really executing exactly the same strategy that I am in its base, but tweaked to you. Because for me, dynastic wealth and leaving a legacy to my family is very important, but that's not important to everybody. So there's gold and then there's gold, and it kind of depends on the kind of gold and the kind of silver that you buy, but you have to go back to your goals. What am I trying to accomplish? And then what is the right tool for that job? Or not, or the best tool for that job.
Awesome. That's really great advice, Lynette. Once again, thank you for your time. It's been a fantastic interview, and I think listeners are going to take a lot of practical advice from this one because you gave some great nuggets of wisdom. So I'll send listeners over to your new channel, Lynette. I'll put the link in the description. Is there any final words that you wanted to share before we leave?
Yeah, stop procrastinating. What I'm seeing inside of the banking system and the fact that we've had bank failures and they bailed everybody out, whether it was the insured depositors or the uninsured depositors. I just recorded a piece on that. Is that going out tomorrow or Saturday? But I just recently did a piece on what's happening in that system where you get to hear the FDIC committee actually laughing about the fact that you're going to get bailed in. And so do not get lulled into this false sense of security because you can't see what's happening. It is happening. This is not something I'm waiting for. The transition began in 2008. They try and keep things as calm as possible so that you don't see what's really happening. You don't get into a position. But yeah, build your local community as quickly as possible. Go and volunteer at Mike's farm because he needs the help and he really appreciates it. And me too. Me too. But get to know your local growers so that and create that community locally, and then join us in our revolution, our peaceful and quiet revolution by just converting fiat money into sound money, and we're going to be in a good position, and you'll be in a much better position on the other side of this mess than you are going into it.